How's it going? Andrew here. Welcome to another episode of The Creative Endeavour, the podcast bringing you inspiring stories from creative professionals from around the world. Beautiful day here in Lawrence, in the South Island of New Zealand. I just had to step out of the studio, taking a bit of the sunshine. It feels like winter has finally broken. We've got some beautiful weather. It's still a little bit of snow clinging to the mountains. It's just magic. I always find something here interesting. I always find the way the light shines off these round forms and even sheep and trees and the light. There's always an idea here for a painting. I just keep adding those ideas to the list, but out here, man, I'm in my element. There's certainly is an abundance of things to paint. And there's the town I live in, Lawrence, right there. Blink and you'll miss it. You know, sometimes I do feel a bit isolated, living so far away. I'm pretty far away from the rest of the world. But then when I think about it, today, we're all connected. So it's this weird kind of feeling of feeling alone, but at the same time, having the world at your fingertips. It's a mind bender. Now, this was my motivation for starting the Creative Endeavour podcast. I wanted to connect with other artists around the world. And in particular, I wanted to find out how they use the internet and some of the tools that we have at our disposal today to propel themselves forward in their careers. Now, this week's guest is an outstanding example of this. I'm interviewing LENA DANYA. She shares her how to paint tutorials with over 470,000 people on her YouTube channel, and also shares her beautiful work with over 90,000 people on Instagram. And look, I know it's not just a numbers game, but in these new technologies, in these mediums that we have at our fingertips, there's an enormous power and potential to reach an untold number of people. And she is really capitalizing on this. I wanted to hear more about how she makes it work as a business, but also hear about her personal story. We had a fantastic conversation. I really enjoyed this. I even found I learned quite a few things throughout this conversation, and it's my hope that you will too. So please welcome LENA DANYA in this episode of The Creative Endeavour. LENA DANYA, very nice to meet you.
Thanks, you as well.
Let's just kick things off here and maybe tell us a little bit about your story, about your art, and about your journey so far.
Sure. Well, I'm a self-taught painter, and I've pretty much been making art my whole life. It was something I was interested in ever since I was a toddler. I was drawing on walls, drawing on everything I could get my hands on pretty much. And that's just always stuck with me. I was always the artist in my class. I always had a very deep interest in art. And my mom and I immigrated to the United States when I was 6 years old from Ukraine. And we moved to Brooklyn, New York. And just the stress of immigrating to a country where you don't speak the language was pretty intense, but art was definitely a way of coping. And so I fell even more in love with art at that point because I didn't have many friends. And this was a way that I could communicate with kids and kind of, you know, maybe gain their interest and make friends as I'm learning English. My mom got me this big art book, this big fat book of, you know, arts and crafts and some fine art things. And I remember just reading through the pages there and being fascinated by the art and trying to replicate it. And so I had a lot of practice already doing realistic stuff at a very young age, probably 7 or 8 years old. And I was making these landscapes. I found Bob Ross on TV and became intrigued by painting landscapes and watched a lot of him. And once we got a computer, that's when a whole nother side of things happened, because I realized I could connect with people. And, raised by a single mom in Brooklyn, New York, I was actually pretty lonely as a kid. So it was nice to be able to go online and read about things and learn about things. It's just this plethora of information that I had access to. And although social media didn't really exist back then in the 90s, I think, late 90s.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Eventually, as it started to form, I began posting my work on a website called DeviantArt at the time, and it was
Mhm.
photography. I was on some kids' sites with art competitions, and I would make art for that. And I was just really interested in posting my work online. And so, with over time, I guess in the like mid 2000s, I started to realize that there were people online who posted their work and had followings and were kind of making a name for themselves. And this is the first time when I realized that maybe this was in fact possible to have, an art career and make a living off of it. It was still a crazy idea, because everybody at that point decided that I shouldn't be an artist. Because, I
Wow.
mean, if you tell your family that you want to be an artist, it's kind of like, oh, maybe you should go be a doctor or like a teacher or, a nurse, something sensible.
Mm.
And so I was just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, even though I already knew what that was. And YouTube came around, and I suddenly have found this new platform. At the time, it was just people on their webcams and people uploading anime videos illegally. So that's what I watched. But I noticed something completely different that I had not ever seen before. And it was real people sharing real stories and making videos just of their lives. And that was very intriguing to me, because you had control over the content you could watch. You yourself could choose to upload content, and it wasn't like the old paradigm, whereas you had to rely on media to do that for you.
Yeah, yeah.
And at the time, I guess I was scared to upload videos, but somehow I gained the courage. And in 2010, I created a YouTube channel, and I just kind of started drawing portraits of various people, whether it was YouTubers or just celebrities. I was just kind of contributing stuff to the community at the time. I wasn't really taking it very seriously. It was just a fun hobby.
Hmm. Hmm.
Then I started to share more of my art and my paintings, and things kind of took off, and people started to find me.
Yeah.
And people started asking me if I'm selling any of my paintings, and I wasn't at the time, but I made them available, which at the time was on eBay. I would run a public auction and just see what happens. And I ended up selling my very first paintings that way. Yeah, and over time, my following just grew, and more people became interested in my art. I became a YouTube partner, so I started earning revenue on my YouTube channel.
Hmm.
And throughout that time, early on, I was in college for an undecided major. I was just figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. Even though I already knew, I just didn't really believe I could do it.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
was also working as a waitress and a bartender, um, pretty much full time. So
Yeah.
whenever I had the free time to come home and make art, make videos, that's what I would do.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and I guess 2013, mid 2013, is when it got to the point where I no longer needed that job anymore. I was able to sustain myself full time off of my art and just paint and make videos. And yeah,
Brilliant.
that's kind of a brief summary.
Brilliant. So 5 years you've been, if my math is right, math is not the
Yeah.
strong suit. You've been a full time
Hmm.
artist. So
Yep.
congratulations. I mean, that's a
Thank
wonderful
you.
thing. I mean, I think there's a couple of things there that I'd love to go back to because, and
Sure.
this is one of the joys for me with this podcast is having the chance to connect with people because I see so many similarities between my story and other people's stories, like yourself. And for me, there's this realization that my upbringing or my past or my childhood is not entirely unique, that there are other people out there who are going through similar things. And so personally, I find that to be really cool, because it's like, oh, I'm not alone in the world. This is awesome.
Yeah.
But I will have a few, younger people that are going to be listening to this, whether they find themselves in primary school or high school, or, just going into college or just coming out, who are kind of feeling like they want to move into art, and they're feeling like they don't really have that as an option that is available to them, and maybe they're not familiar with the strategies or the ways in which they can derive an income from that. But before we get into that, what I'd love to touch on a little bit more is, you said something about, school teachers and, being in school. So if you can take us back to that time when you were in school, and you were, you were expressing an interest and showing real promise with your artwork, and then even having this interaction from people when you would express that you wanted to be an artist, what was that like for you? Because I personally felt that resistance from so many different people saying I couldn't do it. And for me, because I naturally had a bad attitude and was a little bit of a fighter, I'd just be like, well, watch me. I'm doing it, and I used to love it almost and get addicted to people telling me no. What was it like for you?
It was actually very similar. I have that reverse psychology mindset oftentimes, that effect when people are saying, "Oh, you can't do this," and I'm very much like, "I'm going to prove you wrong. You just watch." I guess when you're little, you're not taken seriously because you're a kid, so that was an issue for a while. I mean, my mom was always very supportive of my art. She always was very kind and gentle in the way she approached it with me. So that was really great, because I never felt unsafe to share my work. She never stabbed me in the heart with harsh criticism. She was always very nice about it. She helped me improve. Teachers, I would say, were actually quite similar as far as that goes. For the most part, I've had a overall positive response in school towards my physical work. But when it came to me saying that, oh, I want to be an artist when I grow up, because that's what I would answer when people ask me that question. When I was really young, teachers specifically, would say, "Oh, okay, that's nice." But as I got older, I feel like that resistance grew, and people started to say, "Well, maybe you should consider something a little bit more sensible, something more reliable, with a guarantee of financial stability." So it is harsh. I mean, I remember first grade, my art teacher was telling everyone that nowadays artists don't really make money and don't become successful until they die, until they become famous. They only become famous when they die. And I remember hearing that as a child, and I was so heartbroken.
Yeah.
Like, that can't be right. That can't be true. This is my art teacher.
Well, it's
She
not
should
true.
know.
I mean, it's not bloody
It's not,
true.
yeah. But
I still hear that all the time as well.
mhm.
Oh, your art's going to be very valuable when you die. I'm like, well, how about right now? Like, why can't it be
Right.
valuable right now? But the thing is, and this is why I love, personal development personally. Where, like when I listen to Tony Robbins, for instance, his big thing is modeling success and finding an example of somebody out there who is doing what you would love to be doing. And the best way to come up against a naysayer, I found, is to just go, okay, what you're saying, you believe, that's all good. But what about like a Thomas Kincaid or Robert Bateman, or a Bob Coon back in the day when he was painting wildlife, or some of these American big names of living artists who are doing great work, doing great for the community, but making a solid, fantastic living, and they're vastly fortunate as a result from doing this art. What do those examples say about the what you're telling me, that I'm going to be, well known when I'm dead? Thanks very much. But I can see
Yeah.
these guys doing it, doing a great job, while they're still alive. So, my advice for anybody out there listening would be just, find a role model of somebody doing it. And again, we have a fantastic model in you, Lena, as somebody who is
Thank
young,
you.
who is crushing it at the moment. So again, it's just awesome having an opportunity to talk with you. Look, It's interesting, going into those safe jobs. I still get emailed from people though as well, saying I've got an option A and I've got an option B. My A plan is to go and be a doctor, and my plan B is to be an artist. Meanwhile, they're messaging me constantly, just kind of going, "Hey, what do I do with this painting?" Or "How did you make it when you were starting out?" And various types of advice I'd be asking for. But I'm saying, hang on, wait a second. Why is Plan A to be a doctor if you really want to be an artist? So, can you tell us a little bit about that struggle with yourself, where you were kind of going, "I'm going into college, but it's in my mind. I really want to do this, but I'm not." Was there a disconnect there? Was there a lack of courage at the time? And if so, how did you find it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in high school, I remember sitting in my computer class and I was looking at the this prestigious art school in my area and thinking, "Oh my gosh, I could never afford this, but I have to do this. Like I want to become an artist." And I remember how heartbreaking it was, and I just ultimately ended up deciding that I was going to go to college and see how it went and get a career doing something simple. Like, I mean, it's not simple, but I was thinking of becoming an ultrasound technician.
Simple,
And at the
nice.
time, yeah, exactly. So, it was reliable, there were jobs available,
Yeah.
but there was definitely that internal struggle where, as I was in school, although I was just taking my prerequisites, it was for a year, I felt like this isn't right for me. I'm not. There were some classes I was very interested in, but as far as doing something for the rest of my life, I honestly couldn't see anything but art. And at the same time, I had already started my YouTube channel, and as you said, there was plenty of evidence of successful people. Maybe they weren't painters per se, but they were people utilizing social media to make a living doing acting, music, just YouTube videos. They were independent filmmakers. So there was so much evidence, even friends I made online that were making a living full time doing something online. And so that evidence was enough to convince me at some point that I should stick with it and pursue it and continue doing it. And I get a lot of those same messages where people are in school and they're pressured by their family to pursue something like a more academic path and maybe be a lawyer or a doctor or an architect. And
Hmm.
I get so many messages from distraught kids like, "I don't know what to do. My parents don't support me." And
Yeah.
it's so heartbreaking for me to hear because I know how that is. I
Yeah.
mean, I myself had many disagreements with my own family about it because I come from a very academic family, although there's
Hmm.
many creatives in my family. My grandmother was a nurse, my grandfather was a dentist and a military doctor, and my mom was a elementary school teacher. So everybody went and got an education, got degrees and sensible careers. And so I was kind of the oddball that was like, I'm going to leave school and do art. And so,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, they were worried about me. But I think if you really are extremely passionate about something and you believe in your heart that this is what you should be doing, and your work is solid, you're always working on improving, it's absolutely possible to make a living and you should absolutely stick with it. Yet at the same time, I try to be careful with that advice because I feel like a lot of people have a very romanticized vision of what it would be like to be an artist.
Oh,
And the truth is, there's so much work involved that's, even
yeah.
outside of just painting. There's the admin side and the
Yeah.
business side of things. And not only do you have to be an artist and focus on self-improvement and growth with your work, but also maintaining a business and
Yes.
that whole other that fun side of the
It's a
picture.
beast. I mean, isn't it just an absolute quagmire just trying to kind of navigate your way towards, orchestrating a business, running a business, not to mention all of the online platforms that you have to juggle, and then
Absolutely.
also maintain that creative expression. I don't know about you, but when I spend my morning either writing, recording, editing, or answering emails, when I approach the easel, I'm absolutely shot. Like I feel like my brain power has been sapped and I just need to do something for a little while before I can re-engage creatively. Or sometimes I'm just a little bit burned out that it's difficult to paint. When I realized that, I learned that, okay, I need to get my painting out of the way first and do something creative immediately first. So I get in my 8 hours of easel time before I even set up to do the business side of things. I'm very fortunate as well because my wife works with me full time on the business as well. So we're a team. So
That's awesome.
she can help me, and she does a lot of the video editing. I apply the finer tweaks, do audio levels, that kind of thing. But there's also some emails that I'm the only one that could write that from my point of view, to a client. But it's been a bit of a struggle for me to try to find that balance on a daily basis, to find the motivation or inspiration or just find the way my brain and body works best to make sure I show up every day. I do reflect that. I mean, a lot of people do have this romanticized idea that it is a wonderful, amazing existence to be an artist. And listen, as far as I'm concerned, it's better
It
than
is.
whatever is second best. However, it's not to say that it's not without its heartbreak, its trials, and challenges. How do you let's from there let me ask you, because again, I just want to throw this question to you. It's something that I get asked often when it comes to the daily grind, when it comes to producing your work. Well, do you have a routine or a schedule? How do you ensure that you show up and you maintain that creative energy throughout your practice?
Yes, I do actually have a routine. I haven't always. I would just kind of, I mean, when I first started out, I went into the day just, I'm going to wing it. And that usually results in me being all over the place and not finishing everything effectively. I have a very short attention span. It's hard enough for me to concentrate on things, and I need to set deadlines for myself. Without deadlines, it's very hard for me to get things done, so I have to set little deadlines throughout the day. I do keep a schedule, and my normal routine is actually quite the opposite of yours. When I first wake up, I try to get up early, but I struggle with that. It takes me a while to get my brain going. And so doing something like packaging print orders where it does not require my creative energy, sometimes I'll typically start with that, or answering some emails. If I just get that out of the way the first few hours of the day, then by the time I'm done with that, I feel like my creativity is ready to work for me. And I keep these whiteboards. I have a huge one that I use for my schedule, because if I write a schedule down in a notebook and put it away somewhere, that deadline's not going to be staring at me in the face. That I'm just going to forget about it, and I'm not going to follow the schedule. So I have a whiteboard, a dry erase board, where every day I make a new schedule and follow it in like 30-minute blocks. I think it's actually a 9 to 5. So even though I'm a self-employed artist, I do try to follow a 9 to 5 and
Yeah.
maximize my productivity hours.
Yeah.
However, most of the time I work beyond that, not because I have to. Sometimes I do, but most of the time it's because I want to, because I want
Sure.
those extra painting hours and extra whatever it is that I need to do, edit a video. But yeah, usually my day starts off with some type of admin stuff early on, from 8 or 9 a.m. to maybe lunch around 12. And then beyond that, I work on the art, the painting, the filming. And sometimes I'll have days where I don't get to paint at all because I have too much to do on the business side of things, like too many emails to answer. I had a really good month that time, and so I have to package more orders or original paintings than usual. So yeah, it all just kind of depends on that month, because the tasks do fluctuate. But I would say maybe 50% of my work hours are dedicated to the business side. Sometimes it's even more than that. So
Wow.
pretty much half of my work hours consist of painting, whereas
Wow.
I do all of my filming, all of my video editing. I photograph my art for my prints. I do all the color proofs of that. So I do everything basically. Um, Sometimes I'll hand someone the camera and ask them, "Hey, can you film me from this angle?" And that's the extent of it. So,
Wow. So you're a one man band. A
yes.
one woman band. Beg your pardon. You know what I mean.
Yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. Like I just more power to you. Because
Thank you.
I did try to do that. Myself, but I don't know how I would be able to handle doing every single thing now that I do. I mean, all of this stuff, like including this podcast, I mean, it's all extras, and I just appreciate so much the amount of work, that you must be going to
Thank
actually
you.
make sure that people get to see enough of Lena Danya, So whether it's on YouTube or in print or original work, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
So how do you make sure then that you don't get burned out, that you stay motivated?
Um, I still struggle with that to this day, to be honest. And sometimes I do have burnouts. They don't last very long. It's usually for like a week. Um, I try to focus on things that really interest me and art that interests me. I find that it's easy to keep going if it's work that I'm excited to make. Um, when I first started out, sometimes I would take a commission that I wasn't as passionate about, but because I needed the money, I had to do it. And I would still put my heart and soul into the work and try to create something that the customer would be happy with, and they always were. However, because it's not something that came from me, it's not necessarily my own idea, my own inspiration. I feel like it's a lot easier to get burnt out when you're trying to work really hard for the sake of a financial goal or the sake of, gaining followers or maintaining social media. I find that I always burnt out a lot faster when that was the end goal. So for me, the end goal is really just to make art that I'm excited about. And so that makes it easier not to burn out. However, I do have a very extensive video editing process, which I'm currently trying to hire someone to help me out with that on the occasion because it takes a very, very long time. I pretty much cut out every single time my hand leaves the canvas to pick up a color because it's like a blank spot in the footage that it's very, I don't know, it's very choppy looking, and I like it when it looks smooth and effortless. And so
We do
that
the
takes
same
up a,
thing here.
yeah,
It
takes
takes
up a,
takes a
oh
long
yeah,
time. Yeah.
long time. So there's that, which I'm again trying to find someone to help me out with that. But I mean, I still burn out. I feel like I don't know if there's a magical formula for that. If I do find it, I will absolutely try my best to put it out there. But I do burn out on the occasion, less than before, simply because I try to just focus on things that I'm passionate about.
One of the things that I find does help me, because I mean, I've got one of these personalities. I get really fixated on an idea, and I get really involved in something, whether it's a project. Sometimes these projects have legs, and they run for months at a time. But often, off the back of these things, I do experience that burnout as well. But I found in recent years, what keeps me with a little bit more of a level or a steady flow of production and avoiding those peaks and troughs is listening to things or learning about things, maybe something inspirational, motivational, and something that's not necessarily art related, but something that might be business related or something in the personal development sphere. Do you ever get into anything like that? And if you do, who are some of the people that you really admire, respect, and listen to?
Absolutely. Well, I love to listen to audiobooks when I paint. So a lot of what I do in that aspect is usually when I'm painting because it helps me kind of focus on the art and lose myself in the painting more if my brain is occupied by something else at the same time. It's strange. I can never paint in silence. It's very rare for that to happen. But I mean, I listen to all kinds of things, podcasts about art. Um, there's an artist now who's doing a podcast. Have you ever heard of Sergio Lopez? I
That
don't
name
know.
does ring a bell. Yeah, that name
Yeah,
rings a
he
bell.
he does really beautiful paintings. So he's doing a podcast now that I recently tuned into and found out about. Um, I love audiobooks. Art and Fear by David Orland and or Ted Orland and David Bales.
Okay.
That one, it's a very inspiring essay, basically about artists and their struggles and fears at the canvas. But normally it's honestly just a bunch of YouTube videos, whether it's people talking about business. I have listened to Tony Robbins before as well.
Hmm.
And I don't know if there's specific people that I zone in on. I just kind of take bits and pieces from everywhere.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I'm the same. I'll find myself flicking onto YouTube and then just sort of sorting out all these tabs, almost a playlist throughout the day. I'll have a little bit of Gary Vaynerchuk in there, Tony Robbins, Tim Ferriss,
Yeah.
sometimes Frank Kern, and a few other business things. But then I'll need to listen to something silly or light to kind of get out of the headspace. So I'm listening to a lot of podcasts
Yeah.
like even the Joe Rogan Experience. I love listening to that podcast when he's got a comedian on because it's just nothing to do with anything that is heady at all, just to give my brain a break. But I mean,
Hmm.
isn't it interesting? Like I think our minds must work in very similar ways because I cannot work in silence at all. I have to have my mental faculties chewing on something for the
Hmm.
most part, or listening to something, even if it's loosely. Otherwise I find what happens is my brain starts going over to the dark side. The negative voice starts
Yeah.
creeping in, and then I start, these horrible things that I'm saying to myself, which just kind of really get in the way of my creative production. Do you ever go through anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think, I mean, I do believe that we are our harshest critics, but I mean, that is true to me. I don't think anybody's ever said anything about my work that's worse than what I've thought about it myself.
Yeah.
So absolutely, if I'm not occupied or distracted by something, keeping my mind busy as I create art, uh, for sure things things can go downhill real fast. I mean, I try not to beat myself up too much, but it tends to happen on the occasion. But even music, that helps because if it's something that I really like, makes me feel good, then I am able to focus on the art
Mm,
more easily, and it just makes the process so much better and so much more productive.
yeah.
I feel like a lot of times, sometimes I have a hard time getting a start on my painting because I don't have something to listen to. I don't have material to
Mm,
feed to my brain.
yeah.
And then I focus on how scary starting a new painting is, or just, yeah. So absolutely on board there.
Well, it's interesting because I believe that in order to show up to create our best work, we have to feel good, and when we walk into our space, we have to feel engaged, inspired, uplifted in some way. This is why I can't work in mess at all. Like I've got to have some sort of
Yeah.
order and precision. Now, other artists are different. Like I've seen some artists, that just work in absolute chaos. I'm like, how do you get anything done? But when I walk into my space, I can see the painting on the wall. The brushes are clean. The palette's clean.
Hmm.
It's ready to go. It's ready for me to just walk up to that canvas and
Yep.
do my thing. And I find that's essential. How does your space? I mean, because I've noticed from your YouTube videos that you keep things relatively clean and orderly, and you've got everything laid out concisely. How important is it, that your studio space does this for you? Maybe tell us a little bit about, how you go about setting up that space so it's conducive to creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Environment is so crucial to me. I find that if there's a mess around me, it usually doesn't help the mess that's already in my mind, which there's a lot going on up here. So, just so many thoughts rolling through, so many ideas, and it's very distracting. And so, if my environment is chaos and there's stuff all over the place, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to zone in. And if my brushes, like you said, your brush have to be clean. If mine aren't clean, the thought of having to clean them before starting a painting is not fun at all.
Hmm.
So I will procrastinate. So absolutely, I try to schedule a cleanup into my schedule every day. So once my actual work hours are done for the day, there's my last task is just to clean up and put everything back in place, clean my brushes, anything I have on the floor. And I make messes all the time. I think that's just part of the process of creating. Art can get very messy, especially when I'm packaging orders. My floor is just covered in chaos, but I don't leave it like that. I try to clean it up as soon as I'm done with the task
Yeah.
because I really cannot function in a mess, which I've discovered as I grow older. My home has to be organized and clean. everything. And so the same logic applies to my studio. It's just really good for my overall headspace. It helps me get things done. So yeah, I mean, I do like to decorate. I love to have plants all over the place, and I love hanging my art in pretty frames. You know, those little tiny details all come together, and that's what inspires me to work more. But at the same time, it can't be overboard, because the chaos of clutter will absolutely derail my creative process and cause me to procrastinate. So
Yeah.
I do try to keep things clean.
It kind of, I mean, it shatters the myth of the chaotic, flaky artist. I mean, because I always resented that. I mean, people have got a certain idea of what an artist is like. You know, we're unreliable, we're dysfunctional, we're not punctual, we're terrible with money, we're terrible with time management, all of these things. And a lot of the people that I'm interviewing now are anything, but that. I mean, they are the absolute opposite of that. You know, they just find that find their own order and precision, and they're disciplined and focused. And I really, I reflect that as well, because I feel like, as soon as you walk into that space, if there's something that's not right, it's just, you take it on as almost your own mental state. It's like your outside
Yeah,
world is a
absolutely.
reflection of that internal world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look.
And
Oh,
I agree with that. I find that, sorry,
no, continue.
I
Yeah.
do find that whenever there's a mess in my mind, usually that will reflect in my environment as well. And so I try to maintain that. And I have to say though, I really struggle with time management. My sense of time is right now, and unless there's a looming deadline with a consequence, it's hard for me to motivate myself. So I do struggle with it, but I understand the importance of it, and I do my best to maintain that discipline and structure, because it's so integral to my productivity.
Yeah. There's a little trick. I can't remember where I heard about this, but there's probably several people out there that have said it. A little trick, and I do get myself into trouble with this all the time. And if you're subscribed, people listening to this, if you're subscribed through my website, you might know that I've fallen into my own trap. But I like to make announcements and put pressure on myself publicly, and so I'll say something like, "I've started a podcast, and I'm releasing the first episode next week," and then a month later, it's like, "It's here," But
Yeah.
I'll put this pressure on myself, and sometimes it's not the best thing. But when it comes to dealing with a client, what I found recently, that what I have to do, I tend to want to overpromise things. I try to be as realistic as I can, and then give myself a little bit of contingency. The paintings always take so much longer than I expect them to. So time management
Yeah.
is a tricky one, but it's difficult when you're doing something that can't be measured. We're talking
Yeah,
about
it's hard.
creativity here, and we're talking about things that are felt and things that are emotive, and you can't really quantify or calculate those things, because there's been several times where I've had to repaint something and spend an extra month on it because this version looks better, so I have to do that. But it's a balancing act, isn't it? Look, let's get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty about the business side and how you derive an income from your art. You mentioned something about prints, but can you go through
hmm
some of the ways in which you make money from this creativity that's pouring out of you?
Sure. So I have my YouTube channel, so I gain AdSense revenue off of that. And because my content is very family friendly, I've never had any issues with any sort of demonetization. So I'm thankful for that, fingers crossed. So that is one source of income that I rely on. Another one is, of course, my art store, where I sell my original paintings and prints of my art. So that is my second source of income. And then my third is my Patreon page, where I offer more exclusive content, longer videos, more in-depth look into my process, where it's in real time. You can see my palette, you can see the painting all at the same time, and I just kind of explain what I'm doing, which colors I'm mixing, and why I'm mixing them, where they're going, just all the very intricate details of my process. I try to squeeze in as much as I can there. So those are the three main sources of income that sustain me and keep me alive and paying my bills, feeding my cat, and paying for my art materials and the business side of things. And occasionally I will take a company sponsorship. So if it's a company that I actually really like, and their product is good, I will accept that. Sometimes they'll send me materials, or payment, for a promo in a video. For example, one brand that I work with is Gamblin, which they're the #1 producer of oil paint in the United States. And they're a brand that I actually fell in love with way before they even knew who I was and used them for a while. I couldn't afford all of their products at the time, but the ones that I did have, I really enjoyed and loved. And so I actually reached out to them myself, and they wanted to work with me as well. And so, yeah, they sent me some materials, and that's one brand I work with. Just recently, I worked with Strathmore. They make artist papers, and it was their new oil painting paper. And that was a product that I also fell in love with and decided to use. And I always make sure that it's something that is good. It's a good product and something I've tested before I go into any contract or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it is pretty rare for me to take on a sponsorship, and I get requests for that a lot. And very often it has nothing to do with my art. I get emails like, "Oh, hi, we love what you're doing on your channel. We want to send you some clothes to model." And it's like, I've never modeled clothes and videos ever in my life. I've never done a beauty or fashion video. So I am very selective, even with the art sponsorships that I get requests for. I'm very selective. So that's not something that I rely on very heavily. It's just an occasional thing. But mostly it's just my YouTube AdSense revenue, my art sales, prints and originals, and my Patreon page. So
that's fantastic. So if somebody was listening to this and they wanted to get into, selling their own artwork, they were preparing some art to present to the world, what are some of the things that you would offer to somebody just starting out to even be able to approach that kind of subject?
Well, I think using social media is very important these days, because that's just kind of your doorway to potentially millions of people if you play your cards right. And it is a very slow and steady growing process, but it can be exponential over time if you're very consistent with it and your work is solid. So I would highly recommend using social media for that. I think investing in printing equipment, if you don't have a client base already ready to buy your work and requesting for it, can be a bit on the pricier side. So I would suggest going to a local print shop and having them make some prints of a painting for you. They'll be able to color proof it and make it match the original, and see if you like the quality of that print. So you can start off doing that, and you'll be able to purchase some prints from them in bulk, so it'll be cheaper. But that's one way to start. There's always Etsy as well. That's kind of an online marketplace, and I guess a form of, it's not really social media, but it's an online marketplace. So people can actually find you by searching for art and searching for paintings versus, opening your own domain name. You want to already have an established kind of a following, I suppose. It's always good to have a portfolio regardless of whether you have a following or not. But as far as an art store goes, I highly recommend starting on Etsy, because that's something you can start up right now. So that's one option. But social media is crucial, I think. It has been for me, at least. So,
I'm listening to you, and I'm taking this on board for myself as well. You're giving me some good ideas here, Lena. But you haven't mentioned the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the dreaded G word. Do you deal with galleries?
Yes and no. So
tell me about how you go about. I mean, tell me about your experience there, because I'm very curious about that.
Of course. I don't rely on them, so it is something that I do on my own accord. And I started doing gallery shows. Actually, my very first one was in high school. I don't remember where it was, but my art teacher liked a drawing I made and sent it off to Tampa, and they had an art show there, and it was in the art show. So that was my first experience. When I started doing social media and posting my art online, I did start pursuing galleries, and I remember finding artists that I really admired at the time and looking at what galleries they were showing with, and seeing just the general work that they exhibited, what kind of style they exhibited, and finding galleries that kind of reflected what I like to make. And so I would email all kinds of galleries throughout the United States. And I remember sending about 40 or 50 emails, and only two galleries wanted to work with me. So you know what? Out of those 40, I could have said, "Oh man, I got so many doors slammed in my face. I'm such a bad artist and nobody likes me." You know, I could have taken that route,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
were the two galleries I was very interested in working in, more so than the others. So those two actually responded to me and wanted to work with me. And if they reach out to me on the occasion and invite me to participate in a group show, then I do that. It's an occasional thing. It's not something that I focus very heavily on, but it does help me build my CV. It helps it helps give you credibility as an artist, although I feel like the work itself should be credibility enough. But so I have been doing exhibits since 2012. I did a juried show early on at the start of it. I didn't win anything, but I got accepted into the exhibit, so that was really nice. That was a local gallery. And at this point, I haven't reached out to galleries in a while, but I do prefer to sell work by myself because I have control over the shipment. I have control over everything,
Yeah.
and I get to keep all of the funds, whereas galleries typically take 50%
Yeah,
on average.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's understandable if it's their own collector base, they're providing the sale to you. They're facilitating it. They're providing you a physical space to exhibit your work in a professional setting, a brick and mortar building. They have their own bills to pay. So I understand the need for that 50%.
Yes.
But luckily, because I am a one woman band, I get to, sell my own work by myself, so I don't really have to rely on galleries.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it is an occasional thing that I dabble in, but not something that I'm focused on very heavily. So
For sure. No, I totally appreciate that because I found myself in a similar way. I started off by, it's so interesting. Maybe we could talk a little bit about this because I know that
yeah.
artists in general are very sensitive. And so when you make your approach to the gallery, like I did back in the day, it's a lot like you. I approached several galleries and then I found that I was rejected by most of them. And my first experience, I was rejected by all of them.
Mm.
So that was very tough. But my batting average was not like that. I approached like probably about 5 to 7 in one particular area, and I came back with all my paintings, and that was enough rejection for me. And then I vowed to kind of work on my stuff and then go back and try it again. But it's interesting what you're saying about approaching 50 to come back. I don't think many people realize that those are the kinds of numbers that you're realistically dealing with, even with dealing with clients. For me, if I have to cold call or cold email somebody and say, I have this, are you interested? It can be 100 to 1 sometimes. And sometimes a no is not necessarily a no or a door in the face. Maybe they're just not ready at this time. But the
Hmm.
one thing I think is required as a creative professional is persistence and resilience.
Absolutely.
You have to be prepared for that rejection and not let it destroy you so that you can show up and do it again and again. But no, I mean, it's great that you're now, I mean, and have been for a while doing your own thing. I much prefer. This is a thing about the gallery. I mean, the gallery can be necessary, and some people thrive with that model.
Hmm.
But for me, I want to look the person in the eyes, shake their hand, and just tell them, thank you for purchasing this painting because you allow me to continue to do what I love. And that means everything to me. That means absolutely everything. So I never got that because a gallery would maintain that middle ground and say, you know what?
Hmm.
You two aren't supposed to speak. We're involved here. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't get the names of the people. I wouldn't get the emails or the phone numbers. I couldn't do that. So there's several collectors out there who own my stuff. I have no idea who they are,
Hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely something I can relate to. I I actually some people who purchased my work through the gallery actually reached out to me later on, like years later, and emailed me and asked if for a commission. But there's still a couple people that like I don't know who they are. I mean, I haven't done that many gallery shows. So the amount of work I've sold through galleries versus the amount of work I've sold on my own is very disproportionate,
Hmm.
leaning to me. But yeah, I like being able to write a personal thank you letter when I ship off a print or an original. I like that personal aspect to it, that they can reach out directly to me if something goes wrong or if they're happy. We can communicate directly.
Hmm.
There's that line of communication that it just gets cut off with the gallery. So it does become a bit more cold, and I do feel that way, I guess, around galleries in general. However, there are not all gallery owners are created equal. Some gallery
Of
owners
course.
are very wonderful, and so most of the ones that I've worked with have been great.
Hmm.
But again, there is that sense of
Hmm.
it's not very personal.
Yeah,
You
sure,
don't get
sure.
to.
Absolutely. Like what you say is true. Not all galleries are created equal. I had the great pleasure of dealing with one gallery for a nearly a 12-year run. And these people are like family to me. Shout out Colin and Gay.
Oh, that's
But
amazing.
I showed with them, beautiful couple from Zimbabwe. Showed with them for 12 years, and they would say, "There's somebody in the gallery right now about to purchase your painting. You want to meet him?" And then I'd go down there, and we struck this relationship where we understood where each of us were, and,
Hmm.
and the importance of our roles, and we thrived with that. And so sometimes you can find people that will work with you with the terms that you want to work with, but I find that that's very difficult to negotiate that position, to find what you're comfortable working with if you're
Yeah,
just starting out. Because if you do want to go for a
right.
gallery, you're going to pay that commission, otherwise you're not going to show
Hmm.
there, or you're going to accept whatever terms they have. I in previous podcasts I have said that the gallery works for you. And maybe this is my bad attitude coming through, but I do feel that you're hiring the representative to represent you. And so, you have the majority stake. You are the one directing that situation. Yes, the gallery has to accept you into their stable of artists, but you are the one calling the shots for the most part. And maybe that's why,
Hmm.
consequently, I never got to show with very many galleries, because they're like, "Who are you? Get out of here!" But
Yeah.
now we're opening our own premises, so pretty soon we're gonna have our own titular gallery. So
Oh,
screw it,
that's
screw
awesome.
it. I'm doing my own thing.
Congratulations.
Look, let's you're somebody, when I watch your YouTube videos, I can tell from what you're putting out there that you simply love to teach, and you love sharing what you do with other people. If you don't, you got a great way of hiding it, because it just comes through, in your delivery. I heard, early on, that those that can't teach, and it was certainly the case when it came to my high school teachers or university professors, I was like, what are you doing here? If it was a high school, it's like, you hate children. Why are you teaching?
I
Sometimes I
agree.
really struggled with that so much. But I found myself like having that idea, those who can't teach. And so I never wanted to go into teaching. And then out of necessity, I started teaching live workshops, but then I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And I found that it actually affected very positively my studio work, is having to enunciate these things and reframe them and teach it to somebody else. I found I was getting better. How have you found that whole process? Tell us about your relationship with teaching, and maybe how it's made you develop more as an artist.
Sure. Um, like you, my intention also was not to teach or be a teacher. I was pretty nervous about that because I initially was kind of wondering, I mean, do I really have value to provide, or can I really teach someone something? Maybe they're better off like Googling it. But I mean, as my YouTube channel grew and there were people who were interested in how I created my art, and I got a lot of messages asking for help with certain things. And so I felt almost obligated to try and create something to help, at least in the best way that I can. And I always try to emphasize that this is just my way of doing it. It's just how I do it based on the techniques that I've found or through experimenting or reading. This is just what works for me and how I like to do it. This is not the only or best way to do it. There's plenty of people and out there who do things differently, and that might work better for you, and that's okay. So I try to emphasize that it's really just my method, and this is just one option to try. And so that's kind of how I approach my tutorials. I try to make them as simple as I can and really simplify things in the way that I explain them, because when it comes to the technical details and all the terms, I really struggle to maintain interest, and I try to just simplify all that to make it easy to understand. It has helped me to understand my own process better and find the consistencies within it, because originally I thought, oh, I don't really use any techniques. Like I'm just spontaneous with it. I paint intuitively. And although, yes, that is true in many ways, there is a lot of consistency in my methods. And I sort of discovered that about my own work. And so that helped me then build on that further and develop more consistency and figure out ways to create work faster. So it definitely helped shape my methods over time. And I've demonstrated a few different ways to paint with oils on my channel. And again, it's always just, my angle, this is how I'm doing it. You can try it out. This is just one painting, one idea, one reference. There's so much information out there. So I always try to encourage people to also seek elsewhere and not just take my word as the only one that's right, because that's definitely not the case.
Well, I mean, that's awesome, because it certainly does come through. There's a genuine exchange of ideas there, or a genuine offering of your ideas and techniques. You said a couple of things there, though, and again, like I'm just getting these light bulb moments. But consistency is something that is so important to me. My work, I would engage in, and early on in my career, I'd engage in this thing that I called, abortive work, where you spend days on something only to change it completely or throw it out and start again. And so you waste all of this time. And then looking through like the books, because most of what I had access to was textbooks, not really any original paintings. Looking at books, with images of the old masters, I was seeing something that was consistent, which was this consistent excellence relating to every painting that I was seeing. Now, granted, they probably weren't going to print every Constable painting in the textbook that they were showing as an example of Constable's work. Maybe he had a few duds, but in my mind, I was looking at it going, this guy is consistently good. Every Albert Bierstadt that I've seen has been awesome. Like a Thomas Moran painting, whether it was a watercolor or oil, awesome. And I thought, well, they must have some sort of methodology or way in which they work. And that's what's inspired my own methodology in teaching that. I mean, and like you, it's not necessarily, it's not the only way or the right way necessarily. It's just your way of doing it.
Right.
But it's something that I recognize from my heroes. So did you have any heroes or influences, maybe past or living masters, that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, it was definitely Bob Ross. Just watching him create art on the TV and just a few brushstrokes and this magic would appear. That was very intriguing for me, and that was the first time that I really gained an interest and wanted to try oils. So I don't know if I would have been so interested in oils had it not been for him. Granted, my style is different and my subject matter isn't, and my technique isn't quite like his, but he sparked that interest in oils. Later on, I found out about Ivan Avisovsky, which is a Russian painter. He painted seascapes and battlescapes in the late 1800s.
Amazing
battleships
painter.
and just I love his work. I saw one of his paintings in person at an art show in Manhattan, and it was this, I think it was called The Ninth Wave. And my mom, she remembered learning about it in textbooks in school. And so when we finally got to see that painting in person, I just stood there for a very long time. And I, walked up to various parts of the painting and I observed it up close and then would back away and just really soak in the work and look at all the brush strokes. And it was just so invigorating to see the work. So I would definitely say he's like one of my biggest inspirations. And then Shishkin also, he paints forests and I love
Forget
landscape.
about it. I love Shishkin.
Yeah. So yeah, I had a whole book of his art, and I was very inspired by that. So I guess those are top three. Just water and landscapes. I just love nature,
Yeah.
and so any artist that paints nature is inspiring, and your work as well, because you paint so many brilliant landscapes and paintings, and offer so much advice to your YouTube followers and students. And there's a lot of value in that in your technique. And it's always fascinating to watch other artists, how they create things and how they see the world and explain things.
It's interesting because when I kind of put myself out there originally online, or even teaching for that matter, whether it was speaking to a group or teaching a workshop, I found that a lot of people that were older and retired, or even just on literally in the last years of their life, they were the ones that were showing up to these workshops physically, and I started recognizing this pattern. And the pattern was, these people had lived a full life. They had raised children, they had worked jobs, they had had careers and adventures, trials, triumphs, all that sort of thing. And now that they're here kind of in their retirement years, they now finally have gotten the means and the access to be able to do something that they really love. My point there is that, and maybe you can echo this or speak on it, but I think that questioning those set parameters that are laid down by society, because our school system, our upbringing, our social structures are not designed in our favor if you're creative. However, at this day and age, there's never been a better time to be an artist because there's so
Absolutely.
many opportunities at the same time. So it's just a matter of getting that mental clutter and fog out of the way and just diving straight into it. So you're not one of those people at the end of your life finally doing something that you love.
Right. No, I absolutely agree with that. And I mean, props to those people for realizing what they're passionate about and pursuing it regardless of what age they are. I don't think it's ever too late to pursue something you love and to learn something. I hope that I'm always going to be learning, regardless of my age. That's really the goal. But
Absolutely.
no,
Absolutely.
I definitely agree with you on that. Um, and even in my own school system here in the States, I never really felt like my creative endeavors were really catered to, or it wasn't something that was super encouraged on. Not, I mean, for me individually, because I was always making art and people did respond positively to it, including my teachers, but the system itself does not cater to creative individuals. It doesn't really support people who want to pursue art as a living or any other creative endeavor. It's, find something sensible. And yeah, it's tough because like I struggled for a while with that and coming to terms with that because I hated going to school, to be honest. I loved learning, but the way the system was set up, I did not fit in that mold. And I wanted to draw. I had a different way of learning, and not every teacher was interesting to me. And that's the other thing, is like, why are you in school? Do you hate kids? If you if you aren't passionate about something, why are you there? And that's the thing, is people go into work to pay their bills. And I understand the necessity for that. And
Mm-hmm.
some people are more content with that than others. I, for example, don't think I could have been able to live that life and be happy overall if I had to go into a career that I'm not really passionate about. I'm a very all or nothing kind of person.
Sure.
And so for me, I felt like that I had no choice but to just throw myself wholeheartedly into this. Like I was completely fine with not making a very big income bartending or serving, as long as I had the time to make my art, as long as I could support myself somehow but still have time to make my art. I was content with that. Thankfully, it ended up working out for me. But I think regardless of what career path you choose, if there is something that you really enjoy, whether it's creative or not, if there's something you really love to do, it's so important to make time for that. First of all, you never know where it can go. Like for me, it ended up becoming my full-time job, but you never know what opportunities it can lead you to, or what learning experience, or what people you can meet, and maybe they can teach you something, or you make a lifelong friend. I think there's just so much opportunity out there. If you don't forget about what you're passionate about. It's like we all grow up. I mean, not me, I'm never going to grow up. But, but I mean, we grow up in society and we're put in that mold, like, okay, now you're a busy bee, you're an adult, you got to go get married and have kids and live and work your job and do the thing. But people just forget, they kind of lose themselves in that. And I think life can be very mundane if all you do is just work and then come home and relax from that. There's so much more to life than just working for somebody else's dream.
There's going to be some young people out there, or people that are just wanting to launch themselves into this career. So in a snapshot, if you can, if there was advice that you could give to your younger self, maybe sit yourself down as a 10-year-old and say, listen, Lena, this is what you got to do. What would that advice be if you just had a moment to share it with somebody?
Yeah, well, I mean, just speaking purely from my own perspective and what I experienced, I would advise that people continue to make art and focus on that. I didn't realize how important it is to create art on a consistent basis, and not necessarily only when I'm inspired, because that might happen once a month, or even less. I've had comments, people saying, wow, I haven't painted in 2 years, and I watched your video and I wanted to paint, or I've been looking for videos and I found so many artists, now I'm inspired to paint. And to me, I've been there. I've gone through large periods of time before doing this full time where I would not paint anything for 8 months. That is insane to me to imagine now. And to think how much time I lost and how much I could have improved in that time span. The art that I could have created, whether it was good or bad, it's still a learning experience. So I think the most important advice I could give is just to always create art regardless of what anybody says about it. Learn to kind of take everything with a grain of salt and know that your art is important and it's unique because you created it, and you will learn and grow as you create more art. You can't expect every single painting to be a perfect, brilliant masterpiece. It's always a learning process. You're going to have some paintings that you're not as happy with. You're going to have some paintings that you want to throw in the trash before you're even halfway done. And you just got to power through it and make as much art as you can, and focus on the art that you're interested in. So that's probably what I would tell myself, because I used to get distracted and kind of forget how passionate I really was about this. And I would go months on end without making something because I had, a door slammed in my face, or somebody said something mean that really hurt my feelings. And it was like a way of self-punishing just to not make art. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm such a bad artist, I'm not going to make art anymore. That's such a horrible thing you can do to yourself, because you're only ultimately just hurting yourself. So make art regardless of what anybody says, and just focus on bettering yourself and exploring new subject matter and challenging yourself as an artist, and just really building a body of work. Like, create a lot of work as much as you possibly can. That's really what, a business I think would sustain off of. I don't think my business would be possible had I not made work, if that makes any sense. It's the focal point of my YouTube channel is my paintings. So I always have to be making new paintings. And even if I didn't have a YouTube channel or an audience or whatever, I would still be doing this. And I was, even before it was a job. I don't do this for money, even though this is my income. I paint because I love to, and it's what I've always enjoyed doing. So if that's something you love to do, absolutely focus on your art and really focus on bettering yourself as an artist and growing and creating a lot of paintings.
Lena, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It has been fantastic just having the opportunity to talk with you, and thank you for sharing your story with me. Where can people find some more of your work?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure. And people can find me just by typing in my name on any social media network like Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. It's Lena Danya, LENA DANYA, and my website, lenadanya.com.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Creative Endeavour podcast, and a big thank you to Lena Danya for joining me. If you want to see more of Lena's work, then make sure you check out her website and her Instagram. I've provided links to those in the description down below.
Now, if you like this podcast, then please hit that like button for me and make sure you leave me a comment. And if you want to come back for more, see more of these podcasts and also some of my painting videos, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. As always, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, but most important, make sure you're subscribed through my website at andrewtischler.com. Thanks so much for stopping by. I look forward to being with you again in another episode of The Creative Endeavor.